Britain entered the year 1973 by celebrating her admission into the European community as a turning point in her island history, though not everyone agreed it was a turn in the right direction. Mr. Heath, the man who started it all, sent veteran cars on a commemorative run into Europe at the start of a year which was to see all transport come perilously near to a full stop. And his new link-up with Europe was to be further strengthened by the Channel Tunnel scheme. An agreement with France was signed, but the start of the project remains in the future. The new London Bridge, which was opened by the Queen, replaced the old London Bridge, which had been sold to the United States. The breakup of an oil tanker on the Welsh coast was not at that time regarded as being primarily a wastage of one of our most precious commodities. The world shortage later was to be felt only after the renewal of the Arab-Israeli war. Following intervention by Dr. Kissinger, a ceasefire was arranged under the auspices of the United Nations. Meanwhile, the Arabs had cut the normally free flow of oil to a bargaining trickle. Sunday driving was banned by a number of European countries. And in Britain, queues became the rule at the petrol pumps. Rationing, the government said, could be delayed. Price rises obviously couldn't. The government's prices and incomes policy was what the May Day national strike was all about. And London experienced the horrors of life as it was being lived in Northern Ireland. Car and letter bombs began to explode in the city as part of a new terror campaign. "51 were killed and many injured at the Summerland Pleasuredrome in Douglas, Isle of Man, when fire flashed through the building packed with holidaymakers. Another fire at Butlins in Pwllheli gutted the buildings, but this time, fortunately, there were no casualties. In the midst of the engine drivers go slow, 10 people died and 50 were hurt when the Paddington to Oxford Rush Hour Express jumped the rails at 60 miles an hour near Ealing. Seven men died in the Lofthouse Colliery disaster, a reminder of the price miners pay to get coal, which is one important short-term answer to Britain's energy crisis. In 1973, air disasters resurrected the problems of size. Vanguard Oscar Papa, crashing into a Swiss hillside, killed over 100 British housewives on a special charter flight from Somerset. And a Brazilian airliner from Sao Paulo crashed coming into Orly, killing over 120. Again, the questions included airport safety, navigational aids, and pilot fatigue. And with jumbo jets, the questions which loom are jumbo size. The Russian Konkordsky, on show at the Paris Air Show, was the main challenger to the Anglo-French Concorde. Suddenly, without warning, the Russian plane caught fire and broke up in the air, crashing on a Paris suburb, killing 14 people and injuring 28. Natural disasters included famine and starvation. Across Central Africa, the sun-baked earth dried up to dust. Experts believed that the desert was creeping further southwards. Another natural phenomenon was the eclipse of the sun. The eruption of Helgafell volcano on the Westman Islands off Iceland seemed to suggest that there are as yet no scientific answers to nature's violence. Iceland's fishing industry, already under threat from the volcano, was again in conflict with Britain over fishing limits. Eventually, Mr. Heath and Iceland's Prime Minister Olaf Johannesson found a compromise. Mr. Kissinger did likewise with Hanoi's chief negotiator Lee Duk-to. But the destruction of human lives was to be continued even after the Vietnam ceasefire had become reality on paper. When Mr. Nixon took office for a second time, he faced a new nightmare of distrust in the Watergate affair. Mr. Nixon's predecessor, Lyndon Johnson, died at his home in Texas. The President of the Irish Republic, Eamon de Valera, retired at the ripe old age of 90 after 14 years as President and 27 years as Prime Minister. In Gibraltar, the new Bishop-elect, the Right Reverend Edward Rapallo, joined his parishioners in shared enthusiasm. And the Dalai Lama, exiled spiritual and political leader of Tibet, was welcomed by everybody as he toured European countries. Royal occasions included Queen Juliana's celebration of the 25th year of her reign. She drove through the streets with her grandchildren. In Britain, the world rejoiced in the wedding of Princess Anne and Captain Mark Phillips. And Miss USA, Marjorie Wallace, was crowned the new Miss World. The Queen of Jersey's Battle of Flowers had Henry Cooper as her champion. This replica of the Golden Hind sailed up the Thames before leaving for America. They hoped to cross the Atlantic in about 50 days. In 3 hours, 35 minutes, Concorde zoomed across the Atlantic from Washington to Paris, a world record. Efforts to fly without fuel haven't been very successful. Men have been trying to fly for years. Oh well, let's hope we'll all be flying high again in 1974.